This is Marina Malashevska, and you're listening to UC3P, University of Chicago's Public Policy Podcasts.
Welcome to the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts. This is UC3P, our eponymously named podcast on policy, politics, and current affairs. My name is David Raban, and I'm the production manager for what we like to call the main page. Today, we talk with Greg Gershuny, the executive director for the Aspen Institute's Energy and Environmental Program. He also served in various energy and environment-related positions during the Obama administration. We spoke with him about climate change, the Future Leaders Climate Summit at the University of Chicago, and his earlier government work. No notes today, so let's get straight into the interview. Without further ado, here's the Aspen Institute's Executive Director on Energy and Environment, Greg Gershuny.
Greg Gershuny, thank you for joining us on the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts. How are you and where are you?
Hey, I'm great and very glad to be here. I'm in D.C. right now, sitting in my office at the Aspen Institute headquarters.
So, Greg, you're the current executive director of the Aspen Institute's Energy and Environment Program. Can you tell us a bit about Aspen's mission, its history, and the composition of the organization?
So the Aspen Institute started in the 1940s. It was kind of in response to the post-war era. A group of people got together in Aspen, Colorado, which at the time was, an old silver mining town. And they got together really to talk about what it means to have a good society. And it actually stems from the University of Chicago Great Book Series. And so they gathered there. They held a number of different forums in the 40s and 50s, talking about art and literature and other things. And then what's happened now is we've really evolved. We're an education organization, so we don't do advocacy, and we also don't consider ourselves to be a think tank. But what we do is we bring people together to talk about what a good society looks like through a number of different facets. And so there's a number of policy programs at the Aspen Institute. There are programs on education. There's programs on Native American youth. There's programs on homeland security and international affairs. And so we're the Energy and Environment Program, and we work on a number of issues, but everything is really focused around climate change, whether it's mitigation of the emissions of greenhouse gases and other pollutants through energy policy and agricultural policy. We work on adaptation and resilience, like coastal resilience, how to make farmers and ranchers more resilient to a changing climate, and the national security implications of climate change. And then we do work on putting people together at a table who wouldn't normally have conversations about climate and energy and environment, like work we do in India and in China, as well as the Future Leaders Climate Summit, and other things that we put together.
So you bring together folks who might not come together on their own accord. Can you talk about why that's part of Aspen's mission and what the benefits are of doing so?
Sure. So, we're a nonpartisan, non-ideological organization. And so what we really strive to do is get all the different voices at the table, whether it's voices from different sectors. And, we'll bring together corporate people with government officials, with academics and with environmental groups and other nonprofits, or whether it's, bringing together people who are kind of left-leaning or left of center and people who are right-leaning or right of center. It's important that we talk to each other and have dialogue about these critical issues and topics so that people can have a better understanding of where others are coming from. And in our work, we work to bring people together to consensus in some cases, but really just to educate and let people know things that they may not otherwise be exposed to if they kind of stay within their bubble of whether it's their company or their, people they're affiliated with.
Mm-hmm. So Aspen obviously confers a lot of summits around the world, like the Aspen Ideas Week in Colorado every year. A conference that many of our listeners might not be familiar with, though we hope that changes after this podcast, is the Interpolicy School Summit here at the University of Chicago's Harris School, which is now going into its second year of partnership with the Aspen Energy and Environment team, your team. With full disclosure for our listeners, I'm a co-executive director of the 2020 Interpolicy School Summit. But I'd like to know, Greg, why do you and your team choose to partner with organizations like the Interpolicy School Summit, and why do you continue to seek out new university partnerships in general?
Yeah, I mean, I had so much fun at last year's Interpolicy School Summit. So in 2019, I guess that's still this year, in 2019, we did the Interpolicy School Summit on Climate and National Security. And I mean, some of the ideas and the conversations that we had during the summit, and leading up to the summit, and then the papers that were produced and that we published afterward, really took some innovative and novel lenses to really difficult policy problems. And I think a lot of that had to do with bringing people from different backgrounds together in smaller groups who got to work with each other over the course of several days and then several weeks afterward, finishing up their papers. But, the groups weren't kind of scarred by the failure of previous policy ideas or this didn't work before, so we're not going to try that again. And I feel like a lot of really new and novel ideas were put forward that really can impact the real world as we're addressing these issues. And so this year, we're focused on climate change and urban adaptation, and we're going to look at a number of different cities where climate change is going to be an issue, and how do you build resilience and adapt to a changing climate, rising sea levels, changing temperatures, more extreme weather, things like that cities are going to have to deal with right now, but also in the coming years and decades. And so we're going to look at a number of case studies and that each group are going to put together on different cities.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I really enjoyed last year's summit. I'm looking forward to the 2020 summit as well. I'd also like to give you the chance to say a little bit more about the Future Leaders Climate Summit 2020, which you brought up earlier, but that's also here at the University of Chicago.
Yeah, so the Future Leaders Climate Summit is a new program that we're starting in 2020. It's going to be at the University of Chicago. It's March 26th to the 29th. And we're currently accepting applications for people for that. And so what that is we're going to gather a group of 18 to 30-year-olds, somewhere around 100 people, to spend 3 days together, both hearing from experts on climate science, climate communications, policy, energy policy, environmental policy, people from nonprofits, people from companies, about what they're doing and what the kind of the different levers of change are that are available to them. But then really what the primary reason for this is for the participants to get together and start planning things that they can do in their communities. And so they're going to take back that information and these plans to their local communities, whether it's their university or their town or their city, and work with local officials, work with their neighbors, work with their friends, work with their university leadership to really develop a plan of action on climate, whether it's to reduce emissions, whether it's to build resilience and adapt to the changing planet, or just to educate their neighbors about what climate change is and how it will affect them, so that we can kind of bloom 1,000 flowers and really make climate action at first a national thing that people are talking about it, people are reading about it in the news, but this will help to provoke more action, but then eventually an international action as well.
So, as opposed to the Interpolicy School Summit, which is strictly a conference for current graduate students, the Future Leaders Climate Summit is a bit more broad in terms of who is eligible.
Yeah, and we want to. So the age range is 18 to 30, and so we'll have some people who are current undergraduates, some people who are current graduate students, working professionals, people. We're seeking to have people from all over the country, both from urban, suburban, and rural backgrounds and locations where they live, but as well as having, kind of like I said earlier, having people who are left of center, people who are right of center, people who have different expertise, people, who work in different fields or are studying different topics. Because I think when you get that diverse group of thoughts together, you really come up with some interesting things that people can work on together. And really, one of the main things that we do is build networks of people. And so these are folks who are going to meet at the summit and hopefully, get to know each other and keep in touch and be resources for each other throughout their careers.
Great. Yeah. And for folks who are interested in learning more about the Future Leaders Climate Summit of 2020, you can visit flcs2020.org to learn more about the Aspen Institute's upcoming conference at the University of Chicago. So, Greg, we want to talk a bit about your experiences working in environmental policy at the White House and the DOE. But first, can you tell us a bit about where you're from and how you started on your career trajectory?
Sure. So I was in law school, and I had started participating in a number of activities around my law school and, with the community that was there in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And one of the things I started doing was going up to New Hampshire to volunteer for the Obama campaign in 2007. And I started going up and knocking on doors and talking to voters and kind of talking about the issues. And I really was kind of enthralled by the idea of, policy change at a level that impacts thousands or millions or tens of millions of people, even in small ways, because what I had been working on before in law school was I was working at a public law clinic where you work very closely with one person or one group of people to remedy a specific injustice. And so getting to the opportunity to talk about kind of these larger policy issues was really interesting to me. So I eventually moved out to Gary, Indiana, which is not far from the University of Chicago
Not far at all.
Campus. And I lived in Gary for about a half a year, really working to organize the community there and talking to folks about what they cared about, what topics they wanted to hear more about, whether it was healthcare, whether it was education, or whether it was the environment. And, really making sure that people have the access to vote and the ability to get to the polls to vote.
So what made you want to jump in on the campaign of a long shot candidate from the south side of Chicago as opposed to one of the candidates in the 2008 election who was perhaps more favored by the Democratic establishment? Yeah,
so I read The Audacity of Hope, which was Barack Obama's second book. And the thing that really struck me was his chapter on education and teachers and how we need to value teachers properly and how we need to pay teachers properly because you want the best possible people to be teaching students. And that's not the way the system is set up right now. People go into teaching because they're really passionate about it, but teachers potentially have more of an impact than anyone else that you encounter throughout your childhood, your teenage years, and into college and graduate school. And so we really should be recognizing that value that they bring to everybody's life. And so that's really the reason that I kind of got on board on the Barack Obama campaign because that was something I really cared about. I had the opportunity to have some really good teachers in my life and some teachers that were not as good. And so I saw the value of education in kind of lifting people up out of the situation they were in and allowing them the opportunity to have a better life.
As China's role grows greater on the global stage, you want to stay up to date on the issues most pressing to China both domestically and internationally. Check out the Just China podcast for in-depth analysis on recent headlines and investigative reports on Chinese matters that affect our globalized world. We are Just China. Find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy your podcast listening.
So, Greg, obviously Obama won in 2008, and you went on to become a White House staffer. You worked in multiple roles in the White House.